There are names in Christian television that feel permanent. Names that have been on your screen for so long in so many homes across so many countries, that their presence starts to feel like part of the furniture of faith itself. Joyce Meyer is one of those names. For decades, her voice has been familiar, her face recognizable, and her story deeply woven into the spiritual lives of millions of people around the world. But in recent years, and especially in recent months, something has shifted. The ground beneath this decades-long ministry is moving. And for many observers, the question is no longer just what is happening, but whether what has been built can actually survive it. To understand where Joyce Meyer stands today, you have to understand where she came from, because her origin story is not incidental to her ministry. It is the ministry. She was born Pauline Joyce Hutchison in 1943 in St. Louis, Missouri, and from her earliest years, her home was a place of horror. Her father, a World War II veteran, returned from the war a damaged man, and that damage was visited upon his daughter in the most devastating way possible. By her own public testimony, Joyce endured sustained childhood sexual abuse that lasted for years, not as isolated incidents, but as a recurring pattern of violation that she says began when she was very young and continued until she left home at 18. She has estimated that the abuse occurred more than 200 times. What made it worse, as she has described in her own words and in interviews over many years, was not only what her father did, but what her mother failed to do. Her mother knew. Or at minimum she saw enough to know. And she stayed silent, choosing dependence and fear over protection of her child. That double wound, the abuse and the abandonment, shaped Joyce Meyer in ways that would echo across every decade of her life. She learned early that pain could exist inside a home while the outside world remained completely unaware. That lesson would eventually fuel the honesty that made her ministry famous. And ironically, it would also later make certain controversies surrounding her feel especially painful to those who believed in her. She left home at 18 with no framework for healthy relationships, no emotional vocabulary for trust, and no model for what safety looked like. Her first marriage reflected that. She married quickly, fell into a union with a man who was manipulative and dishonest, and by some accounts became entangled through that marriage in financial wrongdoing she later expressed deep regret over. That marriage ended, and Joyce stepped into what she later described as a season of self-destruction, coping through habits that dulled the noise inside her own mind. Then in 1967, she married Dave Meyer, an engineering draftsman and Army veteran who would prove to be perhaps the most stabilizing force in her life. The early years of that marriage were not easy. Joyce later acknowledged that she was controlling, emotionally volatile, and capable of making life deeply difficult for the person closest to her. Dave, by all accounts, was steady where she was reactive. And at a critical breaking point in their marriage, he told her something that she says changed her trajectory. He had done everything he knew how to do to make her happy, and since she seemed determined to be unhappy, he was going to choose joy regardless. That moment, not dramatic in the way of movies, but quiet and devastating in the way real life often is, cracked something open in her. She could no longer use her pain as leverage over the person who refused to leave. What followed in her account was a spiritual experience in February 1976 that she describes as transformative. A moment while driving, praying the same frustrated prayer she had prayed for years, when she felt something shift in her understanding of faith. That experience launched her into informal Bible teaching, which grew into formal ministry, which grew into radio, which grew into television. In 1985, Joyce launched a radio program called Life in the Word from inside her home in St. Louis. The production was minimal, but the response was not. People wrote to say they finally felt understood. She spoke about trauma, about emotional pain, about the gap between what faith promised and what life actually delivered. That honesty connected with audiences who had never been addressed that honestly from a pulpit. In 1993, she transitioned to television with a program Enjoying Everyday Life, which would go on to reach audiences worldwide. The show was eventually distributed across dozens of countries and networks. In 2005, Meyer was named one of the 25 most influential evangelicals in America by Time magazine. By any measure, The ministry that Joyce Meyer built from a bedroom closet recording studio had become a global institution. But with that scale came scrutiny, and with scrutiny came revelations that many of her supporters found deeply uncomfortable. As Meyer's ministry grew, attention on her financial success increased. In 2003, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch reported that her ministry was taking in $100 million a year. What the reporting also revealed was how some of that money was being spent. Ministry documents showed that Joyce Meyer's Board of Trustees agreed to pay her a $900,000 annual salary in 2002 and 2003, while her husband Dave was approved for $450,000 in each of those same years. The reporting further noted luxury cars, private jets, and real estate tied to ministry funds. Meyer said that her accoutrements, including multimillion-dollar homes and luxury cars, were blessings from God. For critics, those words were a window into a prosperity theology that many found troubling. For longtime supporters, they were disorienting. The woman who had built her platform on surviving suffering and living with discipline was now publicly defending a lifestyle that looked, to many, like anything but. In 2007, Iowa Senator Charles Grassley, the top Republican on the Senate Finance Committee, launched a financial investigation into several of the nation's biggest televangelists, including Joyce Meyer, after receiving reports of lavish spending at the ministries. The investigation examined salaries, luxury expenses, and the use of tax-exempt funds for personal benefit. In his concluding report, Grassley maintained concern over the personal use of church-owned airplanes, luxury homes, and credit cards by pastors and their families, and questioned the lack of oversight by boards often packed with the televangelists' relatives and friends. Joyce Meyer Ministries submitted to a 3-year forensic IRS review and the Senate Finance Committee investigation. According to the ministry, Senator Grassley praised them in his 2011 report for financial transparency and ECFA membership. Ministry joined the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, expanded its board to include independent members, and began publishing annual financial reports. The scrutiny had already prompted the Joyce Meyer Ministries board to reduce her salary and change how she financially benefited from her book sales. Whether those reforms were genuine or reactive remained a point of debate. Critics argued that accountability only arrived once external pressure made it unavoidable. Supporters credited the ministry with eventually doing the right thing. Either way, in 2019, Meyer apologized for her prosperity gospel teachings, the idea that faith can bring financial and physical health, recanting her stance in an Instagram post. It was a significant admission from someone whose earlier teachings on the topic had influenced millions. For some, it was welcome and overdue. For others, it was a decade too late. Then came the tragedies that no press statement could fully address. Christopher Coleman was the head of security for Joyce Meyer Ministries. He held a position of trust, operated in the inner circle of the organization, and was responsible for the safety of the ministry's leadership. In 2009, it was revealed that Coleman had been conducting an extramarital affair and had constructed an elaborate scheme of deception, including sending himself fabricated death threats and telling people his family was in danger because of his work for the ministry. In reality, the threat came from Coleman himself. He murdered his wife and their 2 young sons inside their home. The case shocked the country. Investigators uncovered emails, phone records, and evidence of the fabricated threats. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The victim's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Joyce Meyer Ministries, alleging that warning signs had been present and ignored. The ministry denied responsibility, and a judge ultimately dismissed the case, ruling there was no legal basis to hold the organization liable. But the damage to public perception was real and lasting. Then there was the deeply personal grief of Joyce Meyer's younger brother, David. He struggled for years with addiction and instability, cycling through rehabilitation attempts that never held. He died alone in Los Angeles, his body found in an abandoned building, so decomposed that identification required dental records. He had been dead for nearly a month. When Joyce spoke publicly about his death, she was measured and sorrowful. She had tried to help him. She had offered work, support, and access to treatment programs. He had walked away. They had come from the same household, survived the same beginning, and arrived at completely different endings. And then, in January 2025, came the break that perhaps hurt most, precisely because of what Joyce Meyer had always stood for. Joyce Meyer paused her programming with Daystar Television Network in early 2025, making her the latest in a series of Christian leaders to break ties with the network after a controversy involving allegations of an abuse cover-up. Daystar Television Network had faced mounting criticism following investigative journalist Julie Roy's 2024 report alleging that network president Joni Lamb covered up abuse against her granddaughter. Lamb's son, Jonathan Lamb, and his wife, Susie, accused her of enabling the abuse and engaging in spiritual and financial misconduct, allegations Joni Lamb vehemently denied. Meyer's son, Dan Meyer, wrote in an internal email that the ministry had become troubled by allegations surrounding the Daystar Television Network. Meyer, who has talked publicly about the childhood sexual abuse she experienced at the hands of her father, had been a regular speaker at associated Christian platforms over the years. For her, staying connected to a network accused of silencing abuse victims was not something she could justify, privately or publicly. Her entire testimony was built on the belief that silence enables harm. Walking away in this case was not only a strategic decision, it was a moral one. Viewers can continue to watch enjoying everyday life on other platforms, including the Joyce Meyer Ministries website, app, YouTube, and networks like TBN and Lifetime. The digital migration has brought some continuity. But the loss of a major cable television presence is not something any app can fully replace, particularly for an audience that skews older and built its routines around a scheduled broadcast. Joyce Meyer is now in her 80s and continues to lead her ministry, despite facing new challenges alongside older, recurring controversies. In 2023, she suffered a broken ankle from a fall, underwent back surgery, developed a blood clot in her other leg, and spent months in a wheelchair. She recovered and returned to public ministry. But her physical limitations, combined with the organizational weight of leading a global operation through sustained reputational turbulence, have made succession planning a more pressing question than ever. In September 2024, she hosted the 42nd Annual Love Life Women's Conference in Tampa, Florida, and released a new book titled What About Me? The ministry itself, by its own 2024 annual report, claims that 86 cents of every donated dollar went toward outreach and programs. The work continues. But here is what cannot be ignored. Joyce Meyer built her platform on a very specific promise, that a person could survive the worst kinds of pain, build something meaningful from the rubble, and live with integrity in front of the world. For millions, she delivered on that promise in ways that genuinely changed their lives. The financial controversies, the theological missteps she has since acknowledged, the tragedies inside her own ministry, and now the loss of a major television partnership. None of these erase that impact. But they do complicate the legacy. They raise questions about what happens when a ministry built on one person's testimony grows beyond what any one person can morally govern. They ask whether accountability structures, even reformed ones, are enough when the organization's entire identity is wrapped around a single voice and a single story. Things aren't looking good for Joyce Meyer in the conventional sense. The platform is smaller than it was. The controversies have layered on top of each other over decades.